in terms of Earth's suitability for life, is the Earth typical or is it atypical? And the kind of thinking that says that Earth is not special is essentially saying that to have a planet is to have a habitable planet. In other words, the requirements for habitability are so loose. Now, if this thing would only advance, I'd be very pleased. Okay, that'd be great. That the requirements are so loose that just once you get the planet to form, it'll be habitable. And this whole notion of the habitability and the requirements for habitability then become the big question. What makes a habitable planet? Is any planet a habitable planet, or do you need certain requirements? Really, it is not unknown, and it is widely acknowledged that no, there are requirements. The first one is you need a terrestrial planet. A planet that is terrestrial. Terra means earth, it means dirt. Dirt is very special in the universe. It is the product of stellar fusion and stellar explosions, many generations as the heavier elements are formed. Much of the universe is hydrogen and helium. Dirt is very precious. Next time you walk and you see some dirt, appreciate it. The other thing is it needs to support complex carbon and water-based life. Carbon holds a very special place in its ability to form macromolecules that are the language, essentially, or the vehicles of life's chemistry. You can't do this with silicon. The periodic table only has so many slots, and that particular column is very special, and that particular row is very special, and you only have carbon there. And so anywhere in the universe you want to produce very complex macromolecules that do all the esoteric things that life requires, you need carbon. And then you need the carbon chemistry to be active, and water facilitates that. And then you need the water to be liquid so that the carbon chemistry could go. So that is what I mean by it needs to support carbon and water-based life. To do that, you have to be in the circumstellar habitable zone. Now, I haven't mentioned what that is yet. We'll go over that in a bit of detail. But basically, the point is, not everywhere is good enough around a star. You have to be at the right radius around the star. And guess what? Even the star has to be in the right radius within the galaxy. And so you have all these requirements, and we're going to examine each of these, and then we're going to see a ton more. So back to the planets. So I mentioned the 5,000 exoplanets that have been discovered. This is a NASA poster that just kind of broadly categorizes the kind of planets that have been seen. Some 30% of the stars are gas giants. These are like Jupiter and Saturn. If I were to drop you off and say goodbye, on a gas giant, you would not settle anywhere. You would just keep going down through thousands of miles of gas as the pressure increases to a point that you get to a state of metallic hydrogen. You're not going to survive that. So the other group is like Neptune and Uranus, the Neptune-like, another third-ish, that are also, these are ice giants, these are not habitable planets. Then what's left is super-Earths that are terrestrial. They start out terrestrial and mini-Neptunes. But these are very massive, and their massiveness tends to kind of make uniform their surface structure, which may in fact be not conducive to life. So in the end, you have just a sliver, a 4%, that is terrestrial planet like the Earth. Now, suppose you do have a terrestrial planet. Where do you put that planet? This plot is a sort of a pretty version of a very famous plot by Jim Casting from, I think in the 90s, and in which what it shows is for every type of star, and that's on the left side, you see these the very bright blue, what astronomers call blue. That doesn't look blue, but it's blue relative to the red, and all the way down to the red star. The redder star is a smaller, cooler star. The bright blue stars are very active, very young, very, very energetic stars, and they're short-lived. The sun holds what looks like an average place. And that's a little deceptive to say an average place because it turns out that the average place is not very occupied. So we'll come back to that in a minute. But let's just take that row, that is our sun. From the left, we see some planets. We see Mercury, Venus, then we see Earth in blue, inside of that blue strip. That blue strip represents where you could expect to have liquid water. That is sort of the crudest, most simple way to describe the habitable zone. Okay, the circumstellar, around the star, habitable zone. After that, we've got Mars. Mars doesn't quite make it. It's outside. And then we've got Jupiter and the rest of the planets. Now, you notice that as the star gets cooler, the habitable zone has to come closer. Why? Because it's cooler, you have to get closer to the fire to warm up, basically. But this diagram is only describing things from a very simple point of view, from a standpoint of view of blackbody radiation. If we then include the greenhouse effect and an atmosphere, things get tighter still. This is a paper by Francois Forget from just a few years ago. And it shows how the atmospheric dynamics actually make things even harder. Because what happens is if you, for example, take the Earth and just go a little bit closer, maybe as much as a few percent of the distance it has from the sun, just go a little closer, what happens? Well, that extra heat basically boils off the oceans. It first starts just evaporating at a higher rate. That higher evaporation causes the most important greenhouse gas, and that is water. The most important greenhouse gas goes up into the atmosphere, in which the greenhouse effect then increases the temperature of the Earth, which, guess what? What does that do? Well, that means more evaporation, and that's a vicious cycle. More evaporation, more heat, more evaporation, more heat, and all this water is in the atmosphere. Well, that's not where the story ends. The UV from the star, then the ultraviolet radiation dissociates water and hydrogen. The hydrogen goes way to the top of the atmosphere, and it's blown away with the solar wind. The planet is desiccated and dead, okay? And so the inner edge of the habitable zone, even in our case, just a little further, and it won't be right. On the other side, you get the opposite problem. As you go farther away, now you're cooler, a lot more chance of snow, and snow is white. And so what that happens, the albedo goes up. Albedo is the fraction of light that's reflected and doesn't heat the Earth. So if you have the whole snow, the ground covered with more snow, it's going to be colder. If it's colder, then it's going to snow more, which means it gets colder still, and you get what is called a snowball Earth. And so on both edges, you have more tightening of the habitable zone for these reasons. Now, we said all this in the context of ourselves and our star. What about other stars? There are other stars. This is one way of representing them in this plot. We have the standard color luminosity plot. The vertical axis is the luminosity of the star, and the horizontal axis is the sort of the representative color of the star. It's basically how reddish or bluish it is. Most of the stars in the sky, about 80%, are down here at the red end, okay? The blue end, which is at the top, those are too short-lived and there's too much variation in their intensity to make them habitable. So in the middle, there's only about actually about 6 to 7% that are G stars like our sun. And our sun is is relatively massive, very, very stable, really benevolent star as far as these things go.